All right. Hello, hello. This is Mr. Huff. We're here to talk about Unit 5, Lesson 2, the Supreme Court and Other Courts. The Supreme Court, independent and impartial by design, was established by the Constitution to review and interpret the nation's laws. This court has the final say in all federal cases, and it may surprise you to learn that the Supreme Court only hears about 100 cases every session. What happens to the thousands of other cases in the federal jurisdiction? Well, inferior and special courts handle these cases. We'll talk a little bit about that. And as you move through this lesson, consider whether the structure of the judicial branch allows government to effectively resolve conflict. Okay, so there is a ton of vocabulary in this section here, guys. So make sure that you're writing this down. Make sure you're taking good notes, not just in this video, right? But as you're going through the slides and as you're going through and reading the sections you need to. So, you can take a look at all of these keywords. I definitely make sure those are in my notes. All right, so the judicial power that most courts possess is called judicial review. And we talked a little bit about this way at the very beginning of class, all right, but it's important to come back to this. This is an important concept. Judicial review is the authority to decide the constitutionality of a law or an action. As the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court has the final say in interpreting the Constitution. So essentially, the Supreme Court gets to decide if something is constitutional or not. This power places it on par with the executive and legislative branches of the federal government. And then you can read pages 306 to 308. Guys, be sure that you're reading those sections in the textbook whenever you're going through these lessons. You're not just kind of skimming through it, because that is really, really important. Okay, and so as you read that, think about whether you think judicial review balances power in the federal government. Judicial review came about because of a court case in 1803 called Marbury versus Madison. Marbury versus Madison. You're going to read a little bit about that also, but that's really important. I'd make sure I wrote that down. What is the significance of John Marshall's ruling in Marbury v. Madison? Well, it brought about judicial review. Okay, super important. So be sure that you take a look at that. So how does the Supreme Court work? Well, why do you think there are 9 justices? Does this guarantee a fair outcome? Well, with 9 justices deciding a case instead of just a jury or a single judge, the court follows certain processes and procedures, including but not limited to oral arguments and written opinions on the case. The outcomes of these cases establish a very important precedent to serve as an example and guide for future cases throughout the country. Hearing a Supreme Court case on page 308. As you read, pay close attention to how the Supreme Court processes and deliberates on a case. When you finish, you should be able to know these terms. Again, remember I said there's a lot of vocabulary in this section. Well, here are some of the terms. Concurring opinion, dissenting opinion, majority opinion, and precedent. You definitely need to know what those are. Concurring opinion is an opinion which is basically in agreement with the decision of the court, but which bases that opinion on different reasoning. So I agree with you, but I agree with you for different reasons. Dissenting opinion is an opinion written by a justice who does not agree with the court's decision and explains the reasons why not. Majority opinion is the opinion on which the decision of the court is based, which identifies the issues in the case and the reasons for the decision. And precedent is court decision that stands as an example to be followed in future similar cases. So be sure you read about those as you go through the section. Okay, jurisdiction. It's kind of a complicated concept, but I'm going to kind of walk you through it. What makes a case so important that it is heard by the Supreme Court? Well, unlike other courts in the federal judiciary, the Supreme Court has 2 kinds of jurisdiction: original and appellate. Jurisdiction basically means why does that court, the court where this case is decided? Original and appellate jurisdiction. We're going to talk about those here in just a second. Most of the cases that are heard in the Supreme Court are appeals or appellate jurisdiction, but there are a few things listed in the Constitution where the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. So you're going to read about jurisdiction and appealing to the Supreme Court on page 309 to 312. All right, and as you read, think about why the Supreme Court may choose to take original jurisdiction on a case. All right. When you finish reading, review the following chart outlining a path the case takes to reach the Supreme Court. Okay. So Step one, the case is filed in a federal district court, a lower court than the Supreme Court. Then after that case is decided, the case is appealed by whichever side loses, and it is appealed from the federal courts or from the federal district court up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court then gets to decide if they're going to hear it or not. The case is appealed to the Supreme Court, which accepts only a few hundred out of thousands of cases each term. And then once they accept the court, they do one of a few things. Okay, they say go. They could say go back. The Supreme Court remands the case, which means we're not going to decide on it. We're going to send it back to federal court. They could go forward, so they could decide the case. They could hear the case and issue a ruling, or they could stop, essentially saying that the lower court's decision was right, and that's it. This case is over, and the ruling stands. Okay, so that's kind of the appellate way that a case reaches the Supreme Court. It's appealed from a lower court. Okay, but like I said, there are a few times where the case starts in the Supreme Court, and we call that original jurisdiction. You're going to have to read more about that, page 309 to 312, but be sure you understand the difference between original jurisdiction and appellate jurisdiction. Okay, so district courts, you kind of referred to in the last slide, but let's talk about exactly what these are. With such a heavy caseload, the federal court system is divided into different circuits composed of multiple states and territories. Each state has one or more districts. In fact, each state has a local federal district court, also called the federal trial court, and these courts have original jurisdiction over federal, criminal, and civil cases that do not fall within the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. In this section, we'll learn more about the many district courts and the differences between criminal and civil cases. That's super confusing, super complicated. I know you're like, what? What does that mean? Okay, so basically what it means is that there's a Supreme Court at the top, and underneath it are all these what we call lower courts. And those lower courts all have different names. You don't have to worry about that. But essentially understand that we have all of these different lower courts because if every case was just heard by the Supreme Court would just grind to a halt. There would be too much going on. So we have all of these lower courts. We call them district courts usually. Okay. But again, you're going to be sure to read this topic 7 on page 313 to 315. All right. And it'll talk a little more about that. The federal courts of appeals did not exist until Congress created them in 1891. The need for these courts grew out of the need to help the Supreme Court with a lengthy docket. A docket is a list of cases to be heard. As their name suggests, the courts of appeals hear appeals from inferior courts. They have only appellate jurisdiction. Examine the following flowchart to get a sense of the appellate path in the federal court system. Well, the Supreme Court can hear appeals from state courts, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, which are military courts. The Supreme Court could hear from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, or the U.S. Court of Appeals. So there's all these different things that kind of feed into the Supreme Court. But again, remember, the Supreme Court's here, and then there's kind of all of these layers of other courts underneath it. And you're going to read more about that on 315 to 317. And as you read, think about why federal district courts are key to the operation of the federal judicial system. There are a few other minor courts that are worth knowing about. The Court of International Trade handles civil cases relating to trade with other countries. So if you were, importing goods from China and you had a dispute, you could, sue in the Court of International Trade, for example. Most of these cases originate in port cities along American coastlines. That makes sense. As one of the Article III courts, the Court of International Trade was created by Congress for a specific judicial function to navigate the complexities of international commodity exchange. Congress also created a host of courts known as Article I courts, legislative courts, with specific jurisdictions. One set of courts is the military courts. We also call them courts martial. For cases involving military law, there are military courts for each branch of the armed forces. Because these courts were established by Article I, they do not exercise the broad judicial power of the United States. They are also not part of the judicial system, which is why the rules are different in a military court than in a regular court. And there are still other instances that need to be covered by a particular court. For example, what happens if someone sues the United States of America? Well, first, the federal government has to agree to the case. Then the case is heard by the Court of Federal Claims. There are several other special courts, like the tax courts, which handle tax law, the territorial courts, which hold jurisdiction over territories like Guam and the Virgin Islands. It's all kinds of different courts, all part of this larger system. Okay. And we're not going to do this here, but you're going to go through and look at this activity. One thing super interesting, I don't know how much you've been paying attention to this, but there is a tremendous amount of attention being put on the Supreme Court right now, and that's because one of the 9 justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, died recently, and President Trump has nominated someone new to take that spot. That someone new is Amy Coney Barrett, and she is being having hearings with the Senate right now. We talked about that process in a previous unit, but she's having hearings with the Senate to decide if she's going to be confirmed or approved by the Senate. So it's very very much in the news right now. Okay. But right now we only have 8 justices on the Supreme Court because, like I said, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died a few weeks ago. Okay, so you're going to go through here, watch this video, which I think these videos are super helpful to kind of give you a broad overview of some of the things from the unit. So be sure you're watching those and thinking about the questions that they ask you to think about. That's going to be really helpful for you in terms of the quick checks and the unit test. So I'd be sure to do that. And then we're at the quick check. So that's it, guys. I hope that everyone's having a great day, and I will see you later. Bye.